Maangchi's Big Book of Korean Cooking really is a big book of Korean food. It's probably one of the best beginner books on Korean food. If you don't know Maangchi, or Emily Kim, she's a food YouTuber who specializes in Korean food. Maangchi has been making recipes since 2007, and she got a YouTube name from the Korean word for hammer, which she used as IGN to play City of Heroes. She has a great and bubbly personality. She kind of reminds me of a super nice Korean ajumma who just wants to teach you how to cook. Fans tune in for her easy Korean recipes, but also just want to see her. She's just so pure and delightful human being. I've honestly never seen any angry or mean comments for her. She just connects with everyone. I've been watching her since, I think, about 2014. I even got her first cookbook, and comparing this book to her old book, this one's way better, with updated recipes, better pictures, and a better layout. The beginning of this book is great. It goes over common and slightly uncommon Korean ingredients, a brief description on their taste, and what they might be used for. This is a really great way to start off the book. It helps anyone who's unfamiliar with Korean ingredients, and it also just gives a lot of insight into what Korean ingredients are out there. This book also has pictures throughout using techniques for Korean food. It's a good amount of her stuff that you probably won't find in, say, like a book like Pepin's, which is very similar to this. But I do wish there was a little more, because Pepin's like the gold standard of tutorial cookbooks. So I just wish it was a little more like that. This book also feels very personal, where Maangchi will talk about how an ingredient reminds me of her hometown or a specific moment in time. Every recipe has some sort of story or description about the dish, so you can get a sense of that dish before you even try it. She also throws in tips, facts, or just her thoughts on these sections. She loves mentioning how her fans enjoyed her recipe, and she even has a few pictures from her fans in this cookbook. It's just a very wholesome cookbook all through. I like how the book sections out everything. She has it split into appetizers, fish, red meat, Korean lunch boxes, desserts, street food, just kind of everything Korean. It makes going through this book really easy. Also, each section has an index of the recipes, so it's easy if you're just craving a stew or a meat that you might want to try. You can just flip to the section and look what is there. I ended up making her bone broth, which took 18 hours to make and had a very unique taste. It definitely tasted better than it smelled, but the smell for broth don't really smell that great. I've also made her marinated meats for Korean barbecues, like the spicy grilled chicken and the bulgogi, and it definitely trumps anything you can buy at H Mart. To me, there's a real progression with these recipes. It starts off with rice, which is kind of like the center of Korean food. Then it goes into stews, meats, and then everything kind of comes together in the lunchbox section. It's much easier to deal with than, say, the Momofuku cookbook. Momofuku is littered with recipes, which calls for a sauce from a different recipe that calls another sauce that calls another sauce. But Maangchi's recipes for the lunchbox are just other recipes kind of put together in a box. It's a cool way to kind of see your food come together into a meal. I think the most unique part about this book is the section on Korean Buddhist food. I feel like the section of Korean Buddhist food could be its own cookbook. It was all vegan food and how Korean Buddhists follow a philosophy where they don't eat onions, garlic, or chives because they believe it's too stimulating and it won't help them reach inner peace. With those constraints, she was able to get some really cool recipes, and it's just something that I was really into. Out of all these recipes, the one I'm most interested in is the sweet and crunchy tofu. And after finishing this section, I really just craved to learn more about Korean Buddhist food. If you're interested in Korean Buddhist food, I recommend watching the Netflix series Chef's Table, specifically Season 3, Episode 1. It goes over a Buddhist chef named Jong Kwan, and it's just such a unique and interesting episode. It was my favorite episode of the entire series. The second to last section is covering Korean desserts. And even though dessert isn't really a big thing in Korea until kind of recently, still has some desserts that look refreshing and great. I've made yakgwa before, but I need to try out her recipe since it looks much better than what I made. She ends this book with Korean street food, which I think is a great way to end it because it's kind of the experimental Korean food scene. I really love that she has a section, and knowing that there is a shiot hot dog recipe in this book makes me really happy. This is basically a fried sweet dough stuffed with sugar and seeds and cinnamon. I've had this in Busan before, and it's just so good on a cold winter day. A few gripes I have with this book is kind of a lack of creativity. It feels very straightforward with the Korean recipes. However, it's a great reference book for Korean food, so I really don't think the creativity aspect hurts this book. Another problem I have is this book is kind of a widespread overview of Korean food, though sometimes it doesn't feel as honed down as maybe like this book on Korean barbecue. If you have to get one Korean book, I think this is the book to get. This book is on my frequently used shelf. I pull it out all the time, and I use the recipes all the time. To me, it just feels so personal, like Maangchi's is there with me reading this book and telling me the stories and memories behind each recipe. I haven't been disappointed by a recipe yet. Tips she gives in this book are great. I just really love the pictures in this book. That's why I'm giving this book an 8 out of 10.